Hey friends, if you want to watch super hit movie The Boy Who Just Grew in English, then you must like this video if you are visiting our channel for the first time. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Friends, in today's video, the movie we are going to talk about is called The Boy Who Just Grew. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it all. The interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I'm going to tell you, I'm also going to give you all the information on which platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production filming, post-production budget, box office collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film apart from this. We will discuss about the facts of this film, storyline, star cast, actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end. So let's start the video. The Odd Life of Timothy Green, a warm and lovely fantasy, is the kind of full-bodied family film being pushed aside in favor of franchises and slam-bang confusion. On a picture postcard farm in the middle of endlessly rolling hills where it is always Indian summer, a lovable boy comes into the life of a childless couple and brings along great joy and wisdom. Timothy isn't born and he isn't adopted. He seems to have grown in the garden. The movie very wisely makes no attempt to explain how this happened. His new parents have tried everything to conceive a child of their own, and one desperate night, they open a bottle of red wine and start making a list of the things their perfect child should have. This they put in a box and bury in their garden, and after a torrential downpour and a lightning storm, why, there's Timothy C.J. Adams, covered with wet earth and with leaves growing from his legs. Makes perfect sense to me. How about you? You can call us Cindy and Jim, say the bewildered Greens, Jennifer Garner and Joel Edgerton. Timothy says he'll just call them Mom and Dad. Ah. This clear-eyed and beautiful little boy has a knack for saying tactful things, but a tendency to lack information you might think he'd know. For example, the difference between the two goals in a soccer game. The Greens hardly even attempt to explain his appearance in their house. During an untimely family reunion the very next day, Timothy is so direct and friendly, people sort of accept him. Not so much his grandfather, David Morse, who was a demanding parent to Jim, but certainly his lovable Uncle Bob and Aunt Mel, M. Emmett Walsh and Lois Smith. The supporting cast is rich with not only those actors, but a welcome selection of other familiar faces. Diane Wiest as the mean-spirited supervisor of the local pencil museum, Shohreh Agdashlu as an official of the state adoption agency, Ron Livingston and James Rebhorn as the son and father who own the pencil factory, and hip-hop star Common as the soccer coach. About those pencils. The movie is set in Stanleyville, the pencil capital of the world. Times are hard. Computers are making it tough on pencils, and the factory is threatened with closure. Timothy saves the day with an inspiration from his closest friend, a teenage girl named Joni Jerome, played by the sort of transcendent Odeya Rush. She rides around with her bicycle basket filled with brightly colored leaves, and although her origin is not mystical as Timothy's, she's an open-hearted nature girl who completely agrees that if you have leaves growing from your calves, you must sometimes spread your arms and lift your face to the sun. The Odd Life of Timothy Green is accessible to all but the youngest children, and I suspect their parents will enjoy it too. It respects the integrity of its story by dealing with real emotions of loss and parting. It's intelligently constructed by writer-director Peter Hedges, who wrote What's Eating Gilbert Grape and About a Boy. Instead of being simple-minded like too many family films, it treats the characters with care and concern. Jennifer Garner and Joel Edgerton are appealing together as far from perfect parents, and C.J. Adams has that ability of so many child actors to be pitch perfect. The Odd Life of Timothy Green is a 2012 American fantasy comedy drama film written and directed by Peter Hedges from a story by Ahmet Zappa. Starring Jennifer Garner, Joel Edgerton, Diane Wiest, C.J. Adams, Rosemary DeWitt, Ron Livingston, David Morse, and Common, the film is about a magical pre-adolescent boy whose personality and naivete have profound effects on the people in his town. The film was produced by Walt Disney Pictures and released theatrically on August 15, 2012. It received mixed reviews from critics, earned $55.3 million on a $25 million budget, and had modest ticket sales in its debut weekend. C.J. Adams's performance won him a Young Artist Award for Best Performance in a Feature Film, while Odeya Rush's performance was nominated for the same award. The Odd Life of Timothy Green was released by Walt Disney Studios Home Entertainment on Blu-ray and DVD on December 4, 2012. Plot: the film is told from the perspective of Cindy, Jennifer Garner, and Jim Green, Joel Edgerton, as they explain their experience with a boy named Timothy, C.J. Adams, in an effort to persuade an adoption agency to allow the couple to adopt a child. Cindy, who works in the town's local museum, and Jim, who is employed at the town's historic pencil factory, reside in the fictitious town of Stanleyville, self-described as the pencil capital of the world. The Greens are informed by doctors that they are unable to conceive. Distraught by the news, Jim convinces Cindy to dream up their ideal child and write the child's characteristics and life events on slips of notepad paper. The couple place the notes inside a wooden box and bury it in their backyard garden. After an immediate thunderstorm, which seemingly affects only their property, a 10-year-old boy arrives at their home claiming the Greens as his parents. After finding the box they buried smashed to pieces around a large hole in the ground where they originally buried it, and finding the boy inside their house, covered in mud, they realize that the boy, named Timothy, is actually a culmination of all their wishes of what their child would be. The Greens also discover that Timothy has a startling feature. He has leaves growing on his legs, which he can only cover up by wearing long green tube socks. The next day, at a family picnic, Timothy is introduced to members of his family: Brenda Best, Rosemary DeWitt, Cindy's pompous sister, James Green Sr., David Morse, Jim's estranged father, and Mel, Lois Smith, and Bub, M. Emmett Walsh, Cindy's paternal aunt and uncle. The parents take Timothy to their friend and town botanist, Reggie, Lin-Manuel Miranda, where they learn that Timothy's leaves cannot be removed. Timothy begins to attend school, where he meets Joni Jerome, Odeya Rush, a girl he encounters during a bullying incident. Jim takes Timothy to confront the bullies, and Timothy is invited to a birthday pool party. There, Joni tries to take off his socks and is kicked in the head by Timothy, though they later become friends. Meanwhile, the town's pencil factory, the largest employer in Stanleyville, begins laying off its employees. Timothy convinces Cindy and Jim to design a prototype for a new pencil in an effort to keep the pencil-producing business viable. Unbeknownst to the parents, one of Timothy's leaves falls off each time he fulfills one of the qualities listed on the original slips of paper. Timothy eventually reveals to Cindy and Jim that his time of existence is short and that he will eventually disappear. During another intense thunderstorm, he vanishes from their house and all they can find of him is the pile of paper slips. The Greens' meeting with the adoption counselor concludes with Cindy presenting a letter that Timothy left them before leaving. In the letter, he explains to them what he did with each of his leaves that fell off, with a montage sequence showing each person whose life Timothy touched. After an unspecified amount of time, the adoption counselor is shown pulling up to the Greens' house in a car with the little girl who is to become the Greens' daughter, Lily. Cast: C.J. Adams as Timothy Green. 6. Adams was chosen to be cast in the titular role after working with Hedges and Dan in real life. Jennifer Garner as Cindy Green, James's wife who works at the Stanleyville local museum. Joel Edgerton as James Green. 2. Cindy's husband who works in the pencil factory. Odeya Rush as Joni Jerome, Timothy's crush who has a big birthmark above her chest that she's embarrassed about. She is the one who urges Timothy on because he wants to make her happy. David Morse as James Big Jim Green Sr. Rosemary DeWitt as Brenda Best, Cindy's sister who brags about her own kids. Ron Livingston as Franklin Crudstaff, Jim's boss. Diane Wiest as Bernice Crudstaff, Cindy's boss. Common as Coach Cal. Shohreh Agdashlu as Yvette Onat. M. Emmett Walsh as Uncle Bub. Lois Smith as Aunt Mel. Tim Guinea as Marty Rader. Lin-Manuel Miranda as Reggie, James Rebhorn as Joseph Crudstaff, Michael Arden as Doug Wirt, Rhoda Griffiths as Dr. Leslie Hunt, Deshaun Fanaka as factory worker uncredited, Dalton Morris as banquet hall patron, uncredited. Production. In June 2009, Peter Hedges was signed to write and direct the film, which stemmed from an idea brought about by Ahmet Zappa through his production company, Monsterfoot Productions. The film is one of the first films produced by Scott Sanders Productions after a deal with the Walt Disney Studios was made in 2007. Some scenes were shot on location at the Cherokee County Art Center, located in downtown Canton, Georgia. Reception. The Odd Life of Timothy Green was met with a mixed to negative reception. Review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes reports that 36% of 132 critics have given the film a positive review, with a rating average of 5.2/10, offering the consensus, "It means well, but The Odd Life of Timothy Green is ultimately too cloyingly sentimental and thinly scripted to satisfy all but the least demanding viewers." Mary Poles of Time wrote, "This is a movie about old-time values, a movie with Frank Capra aspirations. But Timothy's life, his very conception by Zappa and Hedges, is definitely more odd than wonderful." Michael Phillips of the Chicago Tribune praised the film's art direction and cast. "It's an elegant, honeyed production, photographed in Georgia by cinematographer John Toll, and it's full of interesting actors." However, he differed on the script, saying, "This fable of the gifted child doesn't go for the throat as it goes about its odd business." Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times was more enthusiastic in his 3.5-star review, calling it a warm and lovely fantasy on a picture postcard farm in the middle of endlessly rolling hills where it is always Indian summer, adding that, instead of being simple-minded like too many family films, it treats the characters with care and concern. Box office. The film had a $2.3 million debut on August 15th. It made $7.6 million in 3 days and finished the 5-day weekend off with $15,908 domestically. The film grossed $51.9 million in North America. Home media. The Odd Life of Timothy Green was released by Walt Disney Studios Home Entertainment on Blu-ray and DVD on December 4, 2012. Film review. The Odd Life of Timothy Green. I'll be the first to admit that family movies aren't really my thing, though not because I dislike them. As much as I hate to admit it, Disney has some really good writers, and they continue to make some really good movies. But by and large, I don't see a lot of family movies, and sometimes have a difficult time reviewing them. One of the most familiar concepts for movies is that of the child who has a profound impact on the people around them, including the adults, especially the parents. Movies like Pay It Forward, Simon Birch, and August Rush all teach that children, the smallest among us, are capable of spectacular things and can have a profound impact on people around them. The Odd Life of Timothy Green comes as the latest installment in the long line of such movies. The movie, directed by Peter Hedges, follows Cindy and Jim Green, Jennifer Garner and Joel Edgerton, respectively, a couple who have been unable to conceive a child of their own despite their extensive medical efforts. Looking to close the book on their lives as potential parents, they imagine what their child would have been like, writing down character traits on slips of paper and burying them in a box in their garden. As they sleep that night, some miraculous force hits their garden, bringing forth a 10-year-old boy covered in dirt with leaves growing from his ankles. This boy is Timothy Green, C.J. Adams, the embodiment of Cindy and Jim's parental dreams. The film continues by showing the challenges that face Timothy in school and family settings, and more importantly, his honesty and genuine goodness in facing them. As summer stretches into fall, however, the leaves on Timothy's ankles begin to change color, cluing the viewer that more changes may be on the way. The Odd Life of Timothy Green has a great soundtrack, brilliant visual direction, and a decent cast, but seems to lack the cohesive gel to bind them all into a great movie. As a general moviegoer, I tend to be fairly generous in suspending my disbelief, though it's a stretch in this one, as a number of moments simply seem too unreal. Oddly, it's not the whole kid grows from a box in the garden scenario that I have a hard time with. It's the strange sense of logic that seems to exist in the movie's world. At one point, one of Jim's co-workers takes credit for an idea not his own and is confronted at the town hall meeting. Rather than a patent lawsuit, things are wrapped up in all of 10 minutes via town-wide discussion at the hall. I'd typically be led to say that the film's thesis is either unclear or so simple that you might miss it looking for something else, something less obvious. But like I said, family movies aren't usually my thing. What it's really about. Make no mistake, The Odd Life of Timothy Green is heartwarming. It's ripe, excuse the gardening pun, with illustration of the way that children see the world, a much more fresh and needed perspective, reminiscent of how Jesus believed children to be the best example of grasping the kingdom of God. One might also be reminded of the parable of the mustard seed, a story about big things with small beginnings, much like the story of Timothy Green. And the whole plot stems from a miraculous occurrence, a good reminder to Christians to be hopeful for miracles. The Odd Life of Timothy Green is a movie for families, as it's entirely wholesome in nature. It's not a movie for the cynical or people looking to be harsh and demanding of its simple, familiar, and yet still profound truth. Cindy and Jim imagine Timothy out of their ideals. They're granted the child they've always wanted, but they spend a good part of the movie trying to hide the ways that he's different. The leaves on his ankles, as an obvious example, as well as downplay his honest-to-a-fault, genuine qualities. As I see this, I'm reminded of how embarrassed we are by the way we as Christians are different from those who've not heard the goodness of the gospel. Despite how much different we're supposed to be than the world in which we live, we tend to spend a great deal of time doing our best to blend in, whether that's making as much money as our neighbors and siblings, or participating in things with no redeeming value. We know how we should be shaped by the ideals that Christ calls us to. So why do we hide them? Why do we downplay the good things in our lives? We agonize about having a new boat or a bigger TV. Why do we use our children to boost how we feel about ourselves, looking at you hockey parents, as Cindy and Jim do on numerous occasions? It could do us a lot of good to look at things with childlike eyes and question whether all of the wisdom we've acquired over the years has actually made us any wiser to the way things really are. The Odd Life of Timothy Green is a reminder of the importance of being genuine, sometimes even more important than being good. It's not about doing good things, it's about doing things well and from the heart. Told in flashback, Timothy Green tells the story of a childless couple in a dying town that are being interviewed about their application for adoption. They then tell the story about Timothy, the young boy who magically sprang to life from their hopes and dreams, which they buried in the backyard one night. Timothy has leaves on his legs, which makes him a potential outcast. As the couple attempts to be good parents, Timothy proves to be everything that they had hoped. But as time goes on and the seasons change, Timothy begins to lose the leaves, a fact he knows spells his end. It's a fact he hides from his parents. Before I get to the main point, I want to talk about the film as a whole. It's a mess. Possessing moments of great power, the film is undercut by a structure that turns it all into cliché. The first half hour is a painful by the numbers set up to the arrival of Timothy. It's painfully cute in a bad sitcom sort of way. After that, the film bumps and grinds through a series of half-done, kind of connected scenes that hint at a greater story not being told and star cameos that seem to have been chopped out from a longer, better film. Who put this film together anyway? Time gallops past us. There is no sense about how much time really passes, since while we get a sense of time passing through school, soccer games, etc., there's no outward change, it's always fall. Characters outside of the three leads are reduced down to bullet points. Who are these characters that come and go? What are their lives like beyond the shorthand? As I said, the film hints at something greater, but it's all reduced down. Also troubling is that the film's attitude about parents and parenting is painfully saccharine, with Jennifer Garner and Joel Edgerton. Tim's parents being damn near perfect until the fight before Tim's leaving. They are near perfect to start. So what did they have to learn about being good parents by having Timothy? It's a point that upsets the film, since it runs counter to the film's premise. Perhaps the thing that they have to learn is not to be so whiny. The Greens' major fault is that they are a whiny couple who mouth fifth-rate lines about how their parents' families are terrible. It isn't natural and seems to be there only because the film was under strict time limits, so they had to spoon-feed the audience pabulum. Sounds like I really hate the film, doesn't it? Well, I don't. I hate the crap that gets in the way of the good stuff. While Timothy is a bit too erudite, I loved some of his exchanges, the adults, particularly with Uncle Bub and Diane Weist. I also love Timothy's love interest, Joni. She may be 11 or 12, but if she were real and more than a bit older, she'd be the one for me. God damn, I like her attitude. She is the wounded outsider who opens herself up to another outsider. Actually, I love every one of the scenes between Joni and Timothy. The largely wordless sequences nail what young love can be. I kept wanting to scream, "Yes, yes, that's it." There is something about how the two fit together that is so magical and perfect that I wish the whole film about them. As much as I dislike or am annoyed by large portions of the film, I love the sequences between the friends. I love the chemistry between Odeya Rush as Joni and CJ Adams as Timothy. Someone needs to find a script on the order of these sequences and pair them again, but for a whole film. Yes, these fleeting sequences are that good and they single-handedly lift an otherwise sadly mediocre film up out of the muck. And now on to my pet peeve with the film. Try as they may to hide it, this film is essentially a Disney death film. No, it is. You have a kid who springs from the ground with green leaves on his legs that change color and fall off like a tree's. It's the life cycle of a plant. Yes, to a large degree. I'm overstating it, but despite the fact that the filmmakers wuss out, the film is really about the short life and eventual death of a magical child. We never see him die. He runs off in a rainstorm and goes back to the ground. But pretty much this is a film about the preciousness of life and how we all only have a short time, a fact foreshadowed by the earlier death of Uncle Bub. And we know at the start that he's going to go, because the whole film is the story about how Timothy changed his parents. I'm not picking on the fact that Timothy dies, rather, I'm picking on how the film handles it. It does so in the least offensive way possible. It does so in a typical Disney way which completely undercuts a great deal of emotion. Why do they speed it up and cut it down? Because they don't want to freak out the parents in the heartland of America. They did it so no one would have to explain death to their children. Timothy just went back to where he came from. He didn't die, not overtly. Watching the film, knowing how it all was going to end, I kept wondering how they were going to handle it. I suspected it wasn't going to be all that well since the film breezed through the story as if it was a highlight reel with points punched home by the declarative statements. I knew they were going to breeze through it. They wouldn't deal with it in any meaningful way because they hadn't really dealt with anything meaningful other than Joni. The leaving of Timothy is more or less Tim saying it's time, then a clap of thunder as the lights go out and Tim is gone, with the previously smashed box back in the ground with a note from Timothy inside. It's so fast as if all death, think of Uncle Bub, has no weight, no bearing on anyone's lives. No one mourns, they are simply made better by it. It's inoffensive, and while it has some emotion, one can't help how this would have been handled by a studio other than Disney. How would have this been if, say, Guillermo del Toro had turned this into a fable along the lines of Pan's Labyrinth? I can only imagine how great this could have been had someone been allowed to actually show effect of the loss. Yes, I know this is a magical, realistic film for kids, not a serious film, but I had hoped for more. I felt cheated, and I knew I was going to be cheated, and I still felt it. What's worse is the actual ending of the Theo is a feel-good moment, and it's going to be, it's a freaking Disney film, and yet it still feels contrived and manufactured. Actually, the film leaves so many questions unanswered, two in particular. 1. How did they explain the disappearance of Timothy? He's here and then he's not. How to explain his disappearance to the town? 2. What sort of deranged people are the adoption people that they would actually give the Greens a new kid after they told this whopper of a story? Seriously, it's one hell of a story. When the film ended, I realized what I want to see is either a remake or a sequel done by someone like John Carpenter or some great horror director. In a remake, Timothy would be some sort of evil being that takes over the lives of the happy couple. The sequel would have Lily, the daughter that Garner and Edgerton adopt, finding out what really happened to Timothy at the hands of the evil couple who took in a missing child and disposed of him in the backyard. Woe be to the diabetic who sees The Odd Life of Timothy Green. This is some seriously thick, sugary stuff served straight, without even a tiny chaser of irony to help wash it down. I know that sincerity is the new black, but really, this one is just too tough to take. My eyes rolled so many times I probably looked like I was having a stroke. Told in flashback by Jennifer Garner and Joel Edgerton, as they apply to become adoptive parents, the action takes place in a Norman Rockwell, Ned Flanders wet dream of small-town America. Stanleyville is the pencil capital of the world, forever baked in magic hour sunlight, where a factory worker making pencils and a docent at the Pencil Museum can live in a gigantic home under starry skies with a garden in the back. It's in that garden where Edgerton and Garner, once again informed they are medically incapable of procreation, bury their notes on what their dream kid would be like. It's a contrived moment, but I suppose it's what happens when really good, really earnest people have a few sips of wine. After a magic rainstorm, a young boy called Timothy, the name they had on their list, appears out of the mud and is addressing them Mom and Dad. Timothy's a cross between Haley Joel Osment's David from AI Artificial Intelligence and that twerp from the Honda commercial. Your reaction to Timothy is entirely dependent on how you view precocious tykes with wide eyes and big dreams that are just a little bit quirky. While I was searching for my air sickness bag, Edgerton and Garner are overjoyed. They are quick to accept him as their own and shrug off his arboreal conception and the fact that he has leaves coming out of his legs. Some thick socks will take care of that problem. As Timothy's sunny and sun-worshipping attitude creates a ripple effect through the town, it exposes how Mom and Dad have some family issues of their own that need work before they are truly ready to become parents. With each of these life lessons delivered, one of Timothy's leaves quietly shrivels up and dies. The garden clock is ticking. Indeed, the child is father to the man and woman, and while the script never goes so far as to say that we thought we were raising Timothy, but Timothy was raising us, the sentiment, schmaltzy music, and endless close-ups are there, at a soccer game, and a town hall meeting, and when the spunky greens rock out at the stuffy classical music recital. Oof. Listen, I'm not a monster. Even with all my protective cynicism, the film broke me down occasionally. When Emmett Walsh's joyous Uncle Bubbles died with a grin on his face, I was moved. Shoot me. And the puppy love scenes between Timothy and the strikingly beautiful Odeya Rush had undeniable charm. Try as I might, though, I just can't figure out who a movie like The Odd Life of Timothy Green is for. The kids I know that are Timothy's age would laugh this treacle off the screen and demand to watch Transformers or iCarly. While the movie is ostensibly about parenting, no parent, particularly ones with kids small enough that they only get a night out once in a blue moon, would have much interest in this either. Maybe if Born Legacy is sold out and the babysitter only has so much time. The Odd Life of Timothy Green is the type of movie you see when you've got grandma over for the weekend and you don't dare see anything that might offend. Maybe there's a business model there, but for entertainment, it doesn't offer much. After Cindy and Jim Green discover that they cannot have children, they write a list of all the things their child would have been and bury it in the backyard. After a freak storm over the Greens' house, a child suddenly appears and is everything the Greens have ever wanted. They are thrown into the ring of parenting with zero experience and desperately attempt to keep their new child from being bullied about the mysterious leaves growing from his legs. I have been interested with this movie ever since it first came out when I was 13 years old. When I finally had the chance to watch it, I was very excited, and yet the film didn't exactly live up to my expectations. The movie begins with Cindy and Jim Green applying to be adoptive parents. The caseworker asks them how they are qualified to become parents. Cindy and Jim begin to tell the caseworker their story. They tell the caseworker that they are unable to have children, and they made a list of things that they wanted their child to be and buried it in their garden. That night, during a freak storm, their dream child seemingly grew from their list. He calls himself Timothy, which is the Greens' favorite boy name. When told to call the Greens Mrs. and Mr., he laughs and calls them Mom and Dad. Cindy and Jim are baffled by this. He also has leaves growing from his legs which he asks his new parents to pay no attention to. The next day, Timothy is introduced to his extended family. His parents put thick socks over his leaves and warn him not to say too much about himself in front of their proper family. Of course, things don't turn out exactly as expected. Timothy asks unknowingly rude questions of his new cousin and takes time to take in sunshine in the middle of a dodgeball game. His proper family does not approve. Cindy and Jim take Timothy to a botanist friend of theirs to see if he can take off Timothy's leaves. He tries, and his clippers break in the process. The botanist finds Timothy's leaves amazing and fascinating, but cannot explain why they are there. The family decides to continue to hide Timothy's incredible secret with long socks. Timothy begins to change the lives of the people he comes in contact with. His new Uncle Bub enjoys Timothy's humor, while a girl from school likes Timothy because she too has a secret. He makes his parents think outside the box and to say what they want to say even when it's hard. He joins a soccer team, and while he doesn't play, he cheers his team on and helps out any way he can. He is a cheerful child, and yet his parents can see that he is keeping something from them. What can it be? I didn't know anything about The Odd Life of Timothy Green going into it. In fact, I'd seen only one trailer, and I honestly thought it was a creepy, quirky horror, Pet Sematary-style film about a kid grown in the garden that wreaked havoc on a quiet community. I was initially taken aback by the number of kids in the screening I attended, and even then, it took me a few minutes to realize it was a young adult movie. Based on the large crowd, I'm also assuming that it's based on a celebrated kids' book. In fact, I saw Ahmet Zappa's name in the credits, so without looking it up, I'll attribute it to him. I don't review kids' films typically, and that's particularly so for live-action kids' films, and I wouldn't have reviewed this one had I known in advance. There's a very simple reason for that. I'm incapable of being objective. I love kids, not just my own, but in general. Adore them. I have an even softer spot for those precocious kids so popular in movies these days. They make my heart swim. Seeing a cute kid go through the experiences and conflict inherent in even the most benign kids' film is emotionally difficult for me. When it comes to kids, my emotions are very heightened, so the death of a kid, it's too much. But when it's a cute, precocious kid, it's devastating. The last time I dared watch a film like that was Bridge to Terabithia, and it wrecked me for hours. When I was looking up movie times for the film on my little iPhone app, I did notice that The Odd Life of Timothy Green was currently sitting at 30% on Rotten Tomatoes. Given my inability to be objective, you'd be better off trusting that score. I mean, single, childless, white old guys are clearly a better judge of this movie than I. They're less inclined to allow touching moments and rousing music cloud their judgment. They're probably also immune to such facile thoughts as, wow, this obviously caring and affectionate celebrity mother has made a really sweet film about the wonderment of life that her kids will be able to truly enjoy and appreciate. Those critics are also not likely to allow their emotions be manipulated by anyone other than Christopher Nolan or Joss Whedon, and any movie without a big dose of wry humor is clearly not going to appeal to them. The Odd Life of Timothy Green is earnest and straightforward, and it has Disney's slickly sweet imprimatur all over it. Yuck, right? They're probably not suckers for magical realism like I am either. It's a preposterous premise, after all. A husband, Joel Edgerton, and wife, Jennifer Garner, devastated by the news that they will never be able to have children of their own, spend one night before moving on with their lives dreaming up all the qualities they might want in a child. They write them down on tiny pieces of paper, put them in a box, and plant them in a garden. The next morning, that child magically appears in their bed, and he's just as they had imagined. It's a miracle of sorts. I'm dumb enough to see a miracle at work in all kids. You insert something in her something, and boom, 9 months later, there's a life living in your home? So silly me, I just went with the premise. Of course, there's a catch. The kid has leaves on his legs, eye roll, right? Which he keeps covered with long socks. Unfortunately, every time he touches the life of someone else, be it a repressed family member, David Morse, a dying grandfather, a shrewish old lady, Diane Wiest, an uptight aunt, Rosemary Dewitt, or another child afraid of her own differences, Odiah Rush, he loses a leaf. We know, too, from the outset, because the parents, in an adoption agency in the present day, speak of Timothy Green in the past tense, that Timothy will die or be taken away or return to the garden from which he grew. I'm sure that the more objective critics will note the inherent manipulation in such a device, noting that those touching moments littered throughout the film are all the more powerful because we know the ultimate fate of Timothy Green. I'm sure those critics, too, think the whole thing kind of creepy. They're probably right. When I was a kid, I went and saw My Girl at the movie theater. I saw it with a friend of mine who brought his sister, and he and I sat a chair apart in the theater, like you do when you're 15-year-old dudes attending a movie together. I remember when the Macaulay Culkin character died, that the entire theater was racked with sobs. I mean, some of those soft-hearted simpletons were in hysterics. It was so awkward for my friend and I hearing all those girly girls around us bawling, and we were so overcome by the tension that we just burst into laughter. We giggled for a good 10 minutes as the people around us blew their noses and wiped away the tears. We were above that sort of blatant manipulation. I'll say this much about my experience with The Odd Life of Timothy Green, however. I'm not nearly as cool as I was when I was 15. When all those people around me started sniffling and wiping away tears, I didn't laugh this time. I guess when it comes to feel-good, tear-jerking kids' movies, I'm just one of those simple, soft-hearted middle Americans. So, don't mind me. Stick with those other critics who don't allow heartfelt fairy tales mixed with a healthy dose of sweetness infect their tear ducts. As wildly fantastical versions of the world featuring kung fu pandas, dueling monsters, and aliens and talking insects have become the primary domain of the children's film, the more grounded magic realist fable has all but faded into oblivion. Only the legendary Japanese animator Hayao Miyazaki still regularly indulges the style, and even his work has veered in a far less earthly direction than it took in the days of My Neighbor Totoro. That 1988 film in particular remains a perfect illustration of how magic realism works so well in this genre. The magic elements serve not as heady symbols, but as manifestations of the innocent wonder with which we view the world when we are young, thereby allowing kids to relate and adults to remember. Peter Hedges' The Odd Life of Timothy Green is a pleasant reminder that the style still works wonders. It tells the story of the eponymous grade school-aged boy, C.J. Adams, who springs from the ground like a seedling after an infertile couple, Joel Edgerton and Jennifer Garner, plants a list of all the dream characteristics possessed by child they were never able to conceive. Appropriately, Timothy has leaves growing out of his legs, which his new parents cover up with socks so that no one asks questions. And no one ever does. Mom and Dad certainly don't care about the flora that comes attached to their miracle child. They simply care that they have him. Upon catching a glimpse of the leaves, Timothy's crush, Odeya Rush, doesn't care either. They're just what make him special. That's the beauty of this fable form of magic realism. Rather than contemplate how Timothy came to be or why he has plant-adorned legs, the viewer simply accepts these story attributes as givens. The children in the audience will have no problem overlooking such implausibilities, and the adults will enjoy trying to reclaim such a carefree state of mind, to momentarily free themselves of the cynicism that accompanies maturation. Hedges telegraphs that the conclusion will be bittersweet, as a frequently interspersed flash-forward scene finds Timothy's parents talking about him in the past tense with an adoptions agent. It becomes clear that the boy will leave the planet as quickly as he entered it. The leaves on his legs fall off with each passing childhood experience, and it is inferred that once they are all gone, he will be too. But even with such gloomy foreshadowing, The Odd Life of Timothy Green never feels sorrowful, observing everyday situations, weekend soccer games, family gatherings, through the ever-optimistic eyes of its pint-sized protagonist. Timothy may be naive. In one scene, he willingly allows a school bully to rub food all over his face. But in an era in which everyone's lives are overcomplicated, such naivete is positively endearing. The Odd Life of Timothy Green doesn't break any new artistic ground, but it doesn't need to, because it masters the fine art of simplicity. There are no explosions, no scenes of exaggerated conflict, no narrative or audiovisual tricks designed to create the illusion of entertainment without offering the real deal. The Odd Life of Timothy Green is an odd little movie. It's the sort of movie you think must be based on a children's fantasy book, possibly by someone like Lois Lowry, author of The Giver and Number the Stars, who writes about difficult subject matters like illness and murder for her young readers. It's the sort of movie where you might ask yourself, what are they trying to tell us here? What's the message? That if you dream hard enough and plant a box in the garden with all the traits you want in a child, that child will suddenly and mysteriously appear in your house, all dirty and confident, with leaves growing out of his legs. But no, it isn't based on a book written by Lowry or any other author. The story was actually penned by Ahmet Zappa, the 38-year-old son of songster Frank Zappa. Yeah, I can see that. The story is cute and heartfelt, but also has a dark side to it. Kind of like a Frank Zappa tune. It's really great to see Jennifer Garner on screen again. She's one of my favorite actresses, and she's only done a smattering of films over the past few years while raising her young family with husband Ben Affleck. Here she plays Cindy Green, who, along with husband Jim, Joel Edgerton, is distraught over the fact that they can't have children. So one night, in a fit of wine-soaked despair, they write down all the traits their phantom child will have. Loyalty, honesty, musical abilities, and so on, then stuff the notes into a wooden box and bury it in their garden. Enough said, time to move on. But lo and behold, a mysterious storm swirls around their house, and only around their house, and the next day, there's a big hole where the box was and a dirt-covered boy in their house. He has leaves growing out of his legs, and his name is Timothy, the only boy's name in their long list of kid names. After checking with the authorities to see if any dirt and leaf-covered kids have been reported missing, Jim and Cindy claim Timothy, C.J. Adams, as their own. They enroll him in school, watch over him like protective bears, and encourage him in pursuits like soccer, even when the coach makes him the water boy, drawing, even when he draws people, warts and all, he's honest after all, and music, even when they have to jump in and start singing to keep him from being a laughingstock. Meanwhile, Jim's dad has daddy issues of his own. Jim Green Sr., David Morse, was never a very supportive father, so it's all a little odd that Jim Green Jr. just wants Timothy to do well at soccer so he can say, "See, this is what you missed," to his own father. But he's learning how to be a dad, so it's all good. Maybe I'm trying to read too much into the odd life of Timothy Green. Maybe it's just meant to be a sweet, funny, sad, fantastical tale about a phantom kid who teaches his parents how to be parents until they get a real kid of their own. Still, I feel like I need more. That being said, the story is intriguing and kept my attention all the way through. Timothy's young friend Joni, Odeya Rush, is different too, which makes for an endearing friendship. I get to see Jennifer Garner on screen again, and even though there are some sad scenes, it ends on a hopeful note about the joys of being part of a family with wonderful, caring parents. The Odd Life of Timothy Green is a much simpler story than I had originally envisioned. And once the premise is accepted, the story flashes with warmth and believability. The action is simple and effective. There are no ridiculous, action-packed scenes involving children in over-the-top situations. Rather, the unique Timothy must deal with the normal problems of an adolescent from his odd perspective. The movie is a genuine family tale about a husband and wife, Jim and Cindy Green, Joel Edgerton and Jennifer Garner, searching to find the missing piece to complete their family. When the couple learns that they will not be able to conceive a child, they decide to move on by writing down all of the qualities their child would have had and burying the list in their garden. After a magical rainstorm, Tree Boy Timothy, C.J. Adams, appears and blam, the couple has the child they've imagined. In a few short months, Timothy manages to live an entire adolescence, dealing with school bullies, his first talent show, playing in The Big Game, the death of a close relative, and falling in love for the first time. Timothy has a remarkable and a very short life. Writer-director Peter Hedges and story creator Ahmet Zappa aren't trying to hide anything. From the opening scene, we know Timothy isn't with us anymore. The Greens' attempt at adopting a child and the sadness felt at the loss of the unique Timothy resonate as the film jumps from scene to scene, side story to side story. The film's ending is spelled out for you, but it works despite the heavy-handedness. It's a fun ride intended for children and their parents. The story moves at an extremely rapid pace, with the inciting incident coming sometime in the first few minutes. The discovery of Timothy is handled with an authenticity and scene economy that left me drooling as a screenwriter. Within just a few minutes of screen time, Timothy appears and the parents accept and understand the magic of his origins. As an audience member, it comes off as surprisingly plausible. The film rockets forward and hits every major and minor plot point with very few surprises. The script is not without its flaws. Often the duo's plotline was too predictable for my tastes, with some pretty on-the-nose exchanges of dialogue. And, at times, the story moves too fast, trying to squeeze the sweeping tale into a watchable amount of time. Also, the lack of explanation of Timothy's magical origins left me a little unfulfilled. How did Timothy come to exist and where does he go next? I feel this could have been handled with a short scene of exposition, and perhaps a quiet moment at the end with a small sapling growing in the garden, and a telling look from the parents as they said goodbye with a smile. Maybe not this exactly, but something to appease the curiosity of the parents, so that they don't go to sleep wondering, what just happened? Fortunately, this question will probably not alter any children's sleep patterns, as they drift off quickly to sleep with a smile. Parents will also delight in knowing that the film doesn't tackle any uncomfortable issues that will have to be explained later awkwardly. The cast is wonderful. Edgerton and Garner's chemistry is perfect, with perhaps the only flaw being that they simply got along too well. The two basically agreed on every decision affecting Timothy, and were a united front across the board. Hedges and Zappa did a good job of sprinkling in a few minor disagreements between the couple to keep the relationship viable, but overall, the Greens didn't disagree until just before the main culmination of the movie. Adam's portrayal of Timothy is a delight, and his smile is contagious. Timothy approaches his new world with the curiosity of an innocent and the maturity of an adult. The filmmakers did an excellent job of casting a collection of actors with a safe, quiet energy that really set the tone of the piece. Diane Wiest, David Morse, Ron Livingston, Common, Rosemary DeWitt, Odeya Rush, and Shohreh Aghdashloo. These actors are great and really round out a distinct and purposeful cast. The Odd Life of Timothy Green is not a great movie by any stretch of the imagination, but it's certainly a very good one, and serves quite well as the happy movie that can be enjoyed with family or friends, or as pleasant background noise to a dull flight into Atlanta. The film is simple enough to be enjoyed again and again, and just odd enough to set it apart from typical Disney fare. The magic starts when the couple, Joel Edgerton and Jennifer Garner, designs the perfect son on paper, writing down all the characteristics they would want their imaginary son to have. They then inexplicably bury the box of paper in their garden as if the son they just imagined is already dead, along with their dreams and hopes. Depressing. However, a boy comes out of the garden and becomes the son the yearning couple always wanted, and he has leaves on his legs. So it sounds like the boy, Timothy, will be magical in some way, but sadly, he just comes off as the title suggests, odd. Naturally, some family members and schoolmates, and me, find him weird, except for a fellow outcast gothy-type girl. Together, Timothy and the girl create artworks in the woods with plants, leaves, and twigs that the movie finds far more fascinating than I did. Diane Wiest shows up because the film needed a good performance, but then she gets roped into the saying the film's most awkward line at a completely contrived town hall scene where an invention, inspired by Timothy, might be just what the small pencil-making town of Stanleyville needs to save the factory. And it plays out just as sugary as it sounds, and I don't think I'm being too cynical here. Writer-director Peter Hedges has made good films. I particularly like Pieces of April, which showcased more thoughtful, genuine characters than Timothy Green, whose stock cast full of small-town, conventionally earnest characters just screams, "Please like me." It's obvious Timothy has arrived to help the would-be parents brush up on their parenting skills before they actually adopt, but there isn't much reason beyond that for this whole story to happen. The characters in Brave are less aware they're in a movie than anyone here, so that remains my pick for family viewing this summer, although there isn't much. After a movie is released, certain viewers will try and pin wacky artistic interpretation on some of the film's symbols. For example, I've read works explaining that Ferris Bueller's Day Off takes place entirely in Cameron's head, and Ferris doesn't actually exist. I've heard that Harry Potter is not the chosen one destined to defeat Voldemort. It's actually Neville Longbottom, his inept classmate. Some even claim that Obi-Wan Kenobi from Star Wars is a clone. Despite thinking that these theories are insane and a little obsessive, I would like to present to you my case for why Timothy Green is Jesus Christ in his film, The Odd Life of Timothy Green. Note, I am not particularly religious and am not criticizing the filmmakers for doing this. I believe that filmmakers have the right to make whatever movies they wish, and it is their choice to work in religious symbols. The nature of the symbols did not affect my opinion of this movie. The film is told in flashback format as Jim and Cindy Green, Joel Edgerton and Jennifer Garner retell their story to an adoption agency employee. The first scene in their story shows us that Jim and Cindy are unable to conceive a child. Grief-stricken, they write down all of the qualities that they want in their child. Among them are honest to a fault, love and be loved, sees the good in everything, and dies for our sins. Okay, the last one's not true, but still. They take the paper upon which they wrote the qualities and put them in a box. They bury the box in the garden and agree to move on. Later that night, the house is hit by a strong thunderstorm. As the storm ends, the rain begins falling upwards. Jim and Cindy are woken by a bump heard downstairs. They investigate and find a small, dirt-covered child playing with the objects they had bought for the baby they can never have. After the child declares that his name is Timothy, C.J. Adams, and calls Jim and Cindy Mom and Dad, they accept their miracle. Yes, they use the word miracle. And begin raising the child. A side note, this means that Timothy was born of Mother Earth, who is a known virgin. Just saying. The story takes place in the town of Stanleyville, which is rife with problems. The pencil factory that everyone works at is closing down, his parents' bosses are jerks, and corporate America is tearing this small town apart. Is the power of Timothy's love enough to save this small town from falling into total economic and moral bankruptcy? Or will the bad guys win? I won't spoil it, but keep in mind that this is a kids' movie, and the main character is Jesus. Besides trying to cure a small town of its sins, Timothy also teaches Jim and Cindy some important lessons on how to be good parents and the meaning of family. He does this by being a somewhat difficult child to raise. Timothy is a strange child who often turns to the sky and extends his arms to form a human cross. That noise you just heard was the sound of the filmmakers smashing you over the head with Jesus symbolism. Between the honesty and crucifixion pantomimes, Timothy becomes the target of bullies. To make matters worse, the bullies are the children of Jim's boss. These trials and tribulations serve to test and improve Jim and Cindy as people. Can you think of anyone else who likes to test the faith of his followers? All in all, I admired the movie's weaving of the deeper messages, but can't say that it's necessarily a children's movie. There are some deep moments and some tragic scenes, and the humor relies heavily on dialogue. While there isn't anything in this movie that kids can't handle, it might be over their heads. If you're willing to go see this film on your own, go only if you like a more meaningful movie-going experience. The artistic value greatly outweighs the entertainment value, and fortunately, those are one and the same for me. If the same is true for you, go see The Odd Life of Timothy Green. Cindy and Jim Green, Jennifer Garner and Joel Edgerton, want a baby so badly that they have gone through all the medical help available, and their personal savings too, all to no avail. They've just been told that there is no longer anything left to try. So they go home sad and weary and beyond disappointed. They are devastated. People deal with grief in different ways. Cindy wants to just forget about it and move on as best they can. Jim wants one more nostalgic run at their little game of imagining what kind of ideal kid they would have. Someone who loves to play, is inquisitive and smart, draws well, loves music, is a decent athlete, sweet and loving, all the things every parent wants. So they write that stuff down on little pieces of paper, put them in a box, and go out in the garden and back and bury the box, as if burying all their hopes for having a child along with the box. Don't ask about the theology or science of this, but in the middle of the night, a great storm arises over their house, and out of the ground comes their ideal child. His name is Timothy, and he's 12. He's sweet and charming, and calls them Mom and Dad. Cindy and Jim are at first shocked and overwhelmed, then want to call 911 to report a missing child, but then discover when Timothy has leaves on his ankles, permanently attached, and that there's a big hole in the garden where he came out. Wait, this isn't someone else's child. He's theirs. Timothy turns out to be the kind of boy who loves nature and doesn't understand much about relating to other kids. He's bullied at school, but he doesn't fight back or even get mad about it. He just endures it. He's terrible at soccer. All the other kids, of course, have been playing since they were toddlers. He finally makes a friend, an older girl, Joni, Odeya Rush, who's sweet to him and enjoys being outside with him. They make a playground filled with colorful leaves and flowers and stick sculptures. Naturally, the rest of Cindy and Jim's family is extremely curious about where this kid came from, but somehow they believe the happy couple's admonitions that it's best not to talk about it. Timothy has a way of making adults feel really comfortable around him. His sick uncle laughs heartily for the first time in ages. His curmudgeon grandfather actually tries harder to be considerate. Even the caustic, imperious witch on wheels who is Cindy's boss, Diane Wiest, in a significant but unsympathetic minor role, drops her crusty defenses ever so slightly around him. Timothy Green is the kind of kid who just brings out the warm and tender in everyone. And that's the kind of movie this is, also. It will bring out the warm and tender in you. Sure, there are lots of pretty landscape scenes. Yes, there's weeping and laughing and loving, sometimes all at the same time. Disney knows how to do a true family movie. Because of the unbelievable premise, it's an odd little film. But this is one that the whole family can enjoy together, and that in itself is reason enough to embrace it. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting sappy in my old age. Reviews of this film dangle words like overly sentimental and thinly scripted. To me, the words that come to mind are sweet and magical. I was reminded of the wildly underrated film Big Fish. This is just an endearing story about a couple desperately wanting a child and miraculously getting their wish. Cindy, Jennifer Garner, and Jim, Joel Edgerton, are infertile. The doctors have explained in no uncertain terms that they cannot conceive a biological child. So one night, on a whim, they write down every quality they would want in a child, if they could have one. Smart, honest to a fault. Okay, yes, they flirt with schmaltzy. They then bury the list in a box in the garden. Imagine their surprise when a small boy sprouts. This is just a sweet story about parenting and family, the good and the bad. Edgerton and Garner are both incredibly likable actors, and Garner has an obvious flair for motherhood. Her chemistry with young Timothy, C.J. Adams, is endearing. This movie won't astound you, but I can use a word to describe it that I don't get to use very often. Wholesome. Peter Hedges' The Odd Life of Timothy Green is one of those movies that most people can probably tell whether they will love or hate just by reading a brief plot synopsis. It might as well come with a disclaimer that reads, "Cynics need not apply." It's certainly a schmaltz fest. That much is clear just from the advertisements. This being a Disney movie, it unashamedly wears its heart on its sleeve. But the real question here is, when did that become a bad thing? We film critics tend to be a cynical lot, coldly examining the technical merits of a film and exploring its inner meanings, intended or not, and political ramifications, that we often fail to just sit back and let a movie speak to us. The fact is, not all movies are made to stimulate the brain. Some are made to stimulate the heart, and that's not always something that should be completely written off. This is especially true when a movie is clearly made with children in mind. The Odd Life of Timothy Green is reminiscent in some ways of the live-action fare Disney released during the 1960s, such as Pollyanna and The Parent Trap, wherein precocious children arrived in seemingly unusual circumstances and were often more grown up than the adults around them. The film that Timothy Green most resembles, however, is the similarly titled The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, but rather than the dark mysticism of that film, Hedges embraces a sunny, fable-like quality that makes this an unmistakably Disney affair. But underneath its sunny exterior is something unexpectedly moving and even grown up, dealing with issues of mortality and child adoption. Timothy Green isn't just for kids, it's a movie for parents, too. It is the film's earnestness that makes it so winning. In an era when irony seems to pervade our popular culture, Timothy Green's unabashed innocence seems like something out of another time. It embraces its simplicity wholeheartedly and emerges as something both deeply beautiful and completely charming. Shot in gorgeous, warm tones by John Toll, Braveheart, The Thin Red Line, and scored with a disarming tenderness by Jeff Zanelli, The Pacific, The Odd Life of Timothy Green is anchored by a strong performance by newcomer C.J. Adams in the title role. Surrounded by an impeccable supporting cast that includes M. Emmett Walsh, Lois Smith, Diane Wiest, Rosemary DeWitt, David Morse, and Shohreh Aghdashloo, the film weasels its way into the heart and stays there, and those who are open to its particular charms will find a lot to cherish. Those who will find it unbearable, and you know who you are advised to stay far away. This isn't a film to be analyzed and picked apart for what it's not. It's a film to be felt for what it is. With an open heart and an open mind, The Odd Life of Timothy Green is a wholly magical experience, a refreshingly old-fashioned fable for the young and the young at heart. The first thing to understand about The Odd Life of Timothy Green, Disney, is that, despite its genuinely wholesome approach, its themes of infertility and death make it unsuitable for younger children. The film strains not to offend, but even older children may find parts of this fable, in which the enchanted 10-year-old boy of the title, C.J. Adams, passes through life leading others by cheerfulness and good example, somewhat puzzling. Let's put it this way. This film has "discuss it with your child afterward" written into nearly every scene. There's nothing contrary to or derogatory of Christian faith. But there's a mishmash of imagery, since the original story by Ahmet Zappa draws on both Christian and Wiccan beliefs. A little too heavily on the Wiccan, it must be said, for the comfort of many viewers of faith. However, there's no indoctrination going on, there's just a lot to think about. And on the upside, from start to finish, the story celebrates familial love. Opening scenes show Jim and Cindy Green, Joel Edgerton and Jennifer Garner, at an adoption agency explaining why they're qualified to become parents. To do so, they first have to explain what has just happened to them, which is where Timothy Green comes in. Deeply saddened to learn they were infertile, the Greens wrote down all of their ideas about what the perfect child ought to be. Honest to a fault, able to love and be loved, possessing a lively sense of humor, and so on. They then buried the notes in a wooden box in their backyard garden. That night, there was a heavy rainstorm, and the next morning, the couple discovered a precocious, dirt-covered, naked boy, freshly sprung from their garden, exploring their house. He's just what they hope to have, except that he has what looks like vine leaves on his shins. This is the Wiccan imagery. These leaves cannot be cut off. No problem there. They simply advise him to keep his socks on at all times. And they begin the process of becoming involved and dedicated parents. Timothy is extremely kind, very patient, very much an outsider among other children, and endures suffering in a Christ-like way, thus the Christian analogy. He is smitten with Joni Jerome, Odia Rush, a slightly older girl who also feels like an outsider because of a large birthmark. Together, they construct a sort of chapel in the woods with stained glass made from colorful autumn leaves. This is the mixed aspect. Later on, in classic Hollywood style, Timothy comes up with a way to keep the town's pencil factory, at which his father is a foreman, from closing. It's not a spoiler to disclose that, with the arrival of autumn, Timothy finds that his leaves are deciduous and knows his time is drawing short, yet it's made clear that his life has had a purpose. Writer-director Peter Hedges has a little trouble keeping his sentimental tale on an even keel. The uplifting, break-out-the-hankies ending, though, is likely to appeal to anyone who enjoys a good cry. The film contains mature themes, some pagan overtones, and a single scatological reference. The Catholic News Service classification is A2, Adults and Adolescents. The Motion Picture Association of America rating is PG, Parental Guidance Suggested. Some material may not be suitable for children. It seems that Disney isn't having the greatest of years in terms of popularity. While I enjoyed all of their other films to have come out this year, The Secret World of Arrietty, John Carter, and Brave, audiences didn't fall into Disney's spell that is usually enchanting and grabbing whenever something comes out. Their latest effort, The Odd Life of Timothy Green, is their weakest film of the year so far, though that isn't saying the movie is bad. Actually, this movie is charming, heartwarming, and funny at times. Other times, it plays like a Disney movie that would have come out in the 1990s rather than something entirely new. Still, though, Timothy Green is a fine movie that families will definitely enjoy watching together. Cindy and Jim Green are a happily married couple who want to have a kid of their own. Their one dilemma is that they are unable to conceive a child, which sends them into a pit of sadness. Instead, they decide to dream up what is essentially their perfect child. Then they bury their thoughts of the perfect kid in Cindy's garden in the background and try to move on with their lives. However, it was on this night that magic took the ideas in that box and created Timothy, who is found by Cindy and Jim covered in dirt and in what was lux. Timothy is no ordinary kid by any means. Not only does he possess every trait of the Green's perfect child, but he also has leaves sprouting out of his legs. Much more is explained as the rest of the movie goes on. This is the first time in a film I've seen where Jennifer Garner did not play an unlikable character. For some reason, there's something I have with Garner where either A, her character was designed to be antagonistic, or B, I just don't like her characters in general. Her only crime in this film is wanting what's best for young Timothy, and to that I give Garner a thumbs up. Not only was she funny and charming in the film, but her character also felt very real, while feeling like a typical Disney mom at the same time. Joel Edgerton was also very likable as Garner's husband and the father figure of the story. The chemistry between these two actors, especially in the scene where they're writing the ideas of their perfect kid, was so sweet and charming to watch that it couldn't help make everyone in my screening laugh, or at least smile to say the least. However, the real star of the show, and the best part of the film, is C.J. Adams' performance as young Timothy. Timothy isn't your ordinary Disney title character. Every trait that Cindy and Jim write down to create Timothy, including honest to a fault and as funny as Uncle Bub, are all presented throughout the duration of the movie. He is a strange and likable kid who happens to come from the ground and sprouts leaves from his legs. Speaking of those leaves, there's a reason why Timothy has those leaves growing from his legs. However, the reasoning is never fully explained until the end, despite some very huge hints that are shown during the middle of the movie. I've said this a lot before with a bunch of these kid actors, but C.J. Adams can go places after this film. He has a charismatic charm to himself, and throughout the film he is sweet and funny. Who knows if Adams will get work after this movie? But he sure does deserve it if he gets roles in more films. The three leads are all great in the movie. As for the supporting cast, they were good for what they were given. But it wasn't their performances that weakened the film. It was their character development that did the trick. The strange thing about every supporting character whose lives are changed by Timothy is that they're all, except for one character, left underdeveloped when the movie ends. For example, Diane Weist plays the grumpy old boss of Jennifer Garner's character. When Timothy first meets her, he says that he can draw a great picture of her, and of course, 5 minutes later, he gets every trait of her perfectly, even the imperfections. However, Timothy tells Cindy to tell the truth about her feelings to the boss, which leads to her getting fired. Next time you see Weist, she has apparently forgiven the mother and daughter without any reason at all. Then Timothy gives Weist one of his leaves at the end of the film. An unexplained forgiveness from many other characters other than the young girl whom Timothy has a crush on and Uncle Bub ensues, and it just leaves the viewer saying, "What the heck?" In fact, all the supporting characters, other than the young girl who becomes the crush of Timothy, feel very one-dimensional and left without an ending, which took me out of the film. A generic Disney story could at least tie up all of the stories presented in its film. The Odd Life of Timothy Green isn't anything we haven't seen before in a family film. This film has a decent story, a predictable ending, and likable characters. However, the script doesn't fully develop the supporting characters, and the outcome of certain things are very predictable by the time one gets to the 45-minute mark. I also found the fact that they tell the story in a flashback setting to basically say that something happens to Timothy before you even get to know him. CJ Adams, however, was the best part of the film because his weirdness and charm help carry the movie despite its flaws. This movie is harmless to take the kids over age 8 to during a late afternoon on a weekend. Nobody has to rush to see this film. But if they actually go to see it, they will enjoy the film for what it is. The Odd Life of Timothy Green is probably Disney's best family-oriented live-action film since The Muppets, even though that really isn't saying a whole lot. The title character of The Odd Life of Timothy Green, Disney's two-ply weeper about a mysterious 10-year-old boy who pops up in the backyard of a childless couple, is indeed odd. Covered with mud, the result of the fact that he has seemingly crawled out of the family's cabbage patch, he's also marked by a disturbing deformity, leaves sprouting from his lower legs. The Greens can't have children, and in the midst of that continued realization, sit down one night and begin to imagine their child into existence. Over a bottle of wine, they come up with traits that would make up their perfect child. Our kid will score the winning goal, have a big heart, be honest to a fault. The list goes on. As the night wears on, reality sets in, and in a bit of a morbid twist, they bury the notepaper on which they dreamed up this fantasy child in their garden. This child was never meant to be. From this event, Cindy and Jim Green, Jennifer Garner and Joel Edgerton, experience a miracle. A flash rainstorm drenches their house that night, and where a box of personality traits and accomplishments was once buried, there's now only a hole, and a dirty 10-year-old boy, CJ Adams, is running through their house. Thus are the beginnings of The Odd Life of Timothy Green. It all sounds silly, and it is. It takes place in Stanleyville, the pencil capital of the world, of all places, and is flush with all the quaint small-town bits and bobs you'd expect. This is honestly more of a Disney Channel movie than anything else, but its cast determines it will hit theaters first. It's a family film we don't see too often anymore, especially given the fact it doesn't star an underage pop star and isn't using 3D to sell its whimsical wares. This is all to say, The Odd Life of Timothy Green is easily digested, even though it's aimed at an audience I'm not particularly a part of. Where the film succeeds is in ignoring the mystery behind Timothy's birth. The importance lies in the family he's become a part of, the traits he holds, and the lessons learned by all those around him as a result. He's the epitome of a perfect child, fearless in his honest and loving to the core. Many gravitate toward him. Some tease that which they don't understand, and his innocence can be seen as weakness, something his unsuspecting parents aim to protect. The story is told largely in flashback as Cindy and Jim tell an adoption agency representative, Shoryag Dashlu, the story of Timothy, the boy who grew in the garden and taught them the perils of parenting and what it means to be a good parent. This is the kind of PG-rated entertainment I grew up with as a kid, most of which has now moved over to television as studios spend their money on larger blockbuster fare. To be honest, I'm not even sure how large the audience is for this kind of film any longer, or if they're even paying attention. Garner and Edgerton deliver cheese-filled, grinning ear-to-ear performances, with Common playing Timothy's soccer coach and David Morse playing Jim's unenthusiastic father, the type of father Jim doesn't want to be, and the one he consistently looks to for approval. The casting continues down a perfect, cliched track with Emmett Walsh and Lois Smith playing Garner's parents, Rosemary DeWitt as the questioning sister, and Diane Wiest playing her shrew of a boss. In most ways, The Odd Life of Timothy Green is going to connect with parents more than anyone else, as they are the ones under the microscope here. Parents' influence on their children's lives are the concerns in question. And like I said, I'm not the target audience for this piece, even though I recognize its charms and appreciate its message. Written and directed by Peter Hedges, director of Dan in Real Life and writer of About a Boy, with story credit going to Ahmet Zappa, of all people. I found the idea of collecting all the traits a parent would want in their child, the realization they won't be able to live up to such lofty goals, and yet you love them anyway to be inspiring. Actors, Jennifer Garner and Joel Edgerton as Cindy and Jim Green. With both the fantasy's serious and silly moments, this on-screen couple brings bits of genuine heart to their characters, rounding off the movie's nicer focus of the subject of parenting. The drama involving this husband and wife can be a bit simple, such as when Edgerton is trying to win the approval of his tough dad, played by Morris, or Garner is competing with her sister, played by DeWitt. But the bits of enthusiasm they have in this movie shows that if this movie asking for something more wholly adult, they'd be up to the task. Score 5. C.J. Adams as Timothy Green. Though he's the centerpiece of this story, Green is the story's least interesting component. Young actor Adams, who worked with Hedges in Dan in real life, adds little spark to this kind of magical character. The reservedness that Adams chooses to play Green with, such as an angelic demeanor, complete with small grins and messianic physical interactions with the son, make him overly precious, as if he were forced in front of audiences who are expected to love him and laugh at the confusion he causes adults, just because he's there. Score 3. Rest of cast. A group of notable faces, Diane Wiest, Ron Livingston, Rosemary DeWitt, even David Morse, are used by the film as simple examples of different types of crotchety adults. Kids might find it amusing, adults not so much. E. Emmett Walsh is used with slightly manipulative effect as an older relative who, well, you can imagine. Even a non-amusing Common pokes his face into this project, playing the world's least supportive soccer coach. Score 5. Not without a message to instill into kids while simultaneously reaching out to parents, The Odd Life of Timothy Green sprinkles a good message of it's okay to be different in its dialogue, but no statements are fresh enough to stand out. The story itself is told in flashback, which makes for too many pointless, but it did happen moments between the two parents and adoption agency authorities, the leader played by Shohreh Aghdashloo. Score 4. Sights. The fantasy of Timothy Green is presented in a natural form, with the title character coming to his parents by means of rainstorm, not by elaborate special effects sequences. That being said, the film gets some visual mileage out of its small-town locations, borrowed from Georgia and North Carolina, while also having a few scenes with strong visuals of multicolored leaves and sunlight. At the very least, Timothy Green is certainly going to alert audiences that a new, colorful season is on its way. Score 6. I have to admit, I was struck by the profound emotions, the sadness and helplessness of infertility only 10 minutes into the film. Although I never had any issues with infertility, the Greens' emotions were raw and real, and I could feel their pain along with them. Luckily, they didn't dwell on the pain for long. Instead, the movie took a happy turn, and the couple chose to move on and celebrate their perfect child for the night. Without giving too much away, Timothy comes into the Greens' life, and although hard to accept at first, they embrace and rejoice in their new family. They discover very quickly many of the challenges of parenthood alongside the immense joys. Although at its core, The Odd Life of Timothy Green is about parenthood, with an underlying theme of infertility and adoption, this is a movie that the whole family can enjoy together. It is very family-friendly and free of the three main movie killers for me: profanity, sex, and violence. Although young kids might not understand the story at the same level as their parents, there is enough humor, magic, and fun characters to entertain everyone. Hedges frames the story by showing Jim and Cindy at an adoption interview with an incredulous auditor, Shohreh Aghdashloo. As they relate the story of how they found and subsequently lost their 10-year-old son, the auditor's wide-eyed reactions remind just how enchanted the whole thing must seem to an outsider. Propelled by Geoff Zanelli's stirring score, which blends folk instruments with human voices and natural sounds, Hedges' treatment of the supernatural is easy to accept, and these interruptions help to put the pic's magical realism in perspective. Unusually for a kid pick, this one unfolds primarily from the adult's perspective, though Timothy is the character everyone will remember most. As played by Adams, the boy appears near to bursting with the joy of being alive, unperturbed by teasing or disappointment or any of the setbacks that make childhood so difficult on real kids. Of course, Timothy isn't like the other boys at school. He often stands with arms outstretched and eyes closed, absorbing the sun's rays. And in lieu of a belly button, he has green leaves sprouting from his ankles. They can't be pruned, but unbeknownst to his parents, who order Timothy to wear socks at all times lest his classmates make fun of him for being different, They turn brown and fall off as the year progresses, this brewing sense that the boy is not theirs to keep supplies much of the film's dramatic tension. Leaves, like pencils, serve as an elegant motif throughout the film, playing an important role in how the town solves the local employment crisis. But mostly they signify growth, and it's encouraging to see a story in which adults, so confident of what they think they want, are given so much room to improve. Garner and Edgerton are both immensely likable, and yet they bicker and behave in childish ways, learning from Timothy what it means to be a parent. It takes a special sensibility to make people look at something as simple as leaves and life in a new way. Hedges accomplishes that with a heartfelt story, once again, about a boy. Disney draws a big, fat bullseye on the fast-growing infertile couple demographic with this airless misfire. Cindy and Jim Green, Jennifer Garner and Joel Edgerton, an idealized, if slightly careworn early middle-aged couple, have tried for years to have a child of their own. The night they give up, they succumb to the fantasy of what might have been, writing down all the attributes they wished for in their would-be child, and then putting them all in a box they bury in their garden. While they sleep, a magical storm soaks the garden, and Timothy, C.J. Adams, the boy of their dreams, emerges, gazing at them with limpid eyes. After a moment or two of disbelief, the two slip into the roles he assigns them, becoming Timothy's mother and father, and learning how difficult actual parenting can be. "We made lots of mistakes," says Jim. "We made mistakes trying to fix our mistakes," says Cindy. "Isn't that what makes you a parent?" he returns. That's a great setup for a filmmaker with a light touch and a gift for deadpan surrealism, but Peter Hedges keeps things resolutely somber and moralistic, leeching the premise of nearly all its magic. After a tinkly piano and aerial shots of golden leaves cue the arrival of something really, really special over the opening credits, the main characters declare that they're about to tell us a story. Worse yet, they list all their takeaway points in advance. Like every good story, this one starts with a dream, as if clicking through a clumsy PowerPoint presentation. Golden hour footage and Celebration City-style art direction makes even a family picnic look like an especially Disneyed Martha Stewart production. Even though that nostalgia for an America that never actually existed fights the screenplay's message about reality being a lot messier than fantasy. The supporting characters, all sporting single traits, might as well be cartoons. The rich old man who owns the pencil factory, where nearly every working adult in town toils away, is a Mr. Burns look-alike. And things the filmmakers want us to remember are always repeated at least once, like the signs the camera lingers on that advertise the soon-to-be obsolete factory or protest its much-discussed layoffs. The factory subplot takes up a lot of time without ever really going anywhere, until a gimmicky happy ending ties it back to Timothy. Meanwhile, this unflappable old soul lives out all the attributes and accomplishments his parents put in the box, ticking through the list with a mechanical inevitability that makes the moral feel more important than the story. Jim and Cindy are all too fallible as parents, but Timothy never seems less than perfect. Even when he delivers the klutziness they ordered up as a series of endearing bloopers. The recent Ruby Sparks begins with a nearly identical idea and does something much more interesting with it. In Jonathan Dayton and Valerie Faris's film, the person who materializes through the power of longing is a girlfriend. She's conjured up by Calvin, a geeky writer whose control freak tendencies have isolated him from almost everyone else. Like the Greens, Calvin learns the hard way about the messiness and unpredictability of real relationships, but that's where the similarity ends. Calvin's constant questioning of his own sanity, his ultimate horror at the control he has over his creation, and the funny, emotionally honest situations they keep getting into, make Ruby Sparks as imperfect but endearing as its often difficult characters. While the odd life of Timothy Green remains as unreal as that eerily perfect little boy. Directed by Peter Hedges. Screenplay by Peter Hedges. Story by Ahmet Zappa. Produced by Scott Sanders, James Whitaker. Ahmet Zappa, starring Jennifer Garner, Joel Edgerton, Diane Wiest, Adams, Rosemary DeWitt, Ron Livingston, David Morse. Common. Cinematography John Toll. Edited by Andrew Monshine. Music by Jeff Zanelli. Production. Companies Walt Disney Pictures. Scott Sanders Productions. Distributed by Walt Disney Studios. Motion Pictures. Release date August 15, 2012. Running time 100 minutes. Country United States. Language English. Budget $25 million. Box office $56 million. The super hit movie. Subscriber my channel, and thanks for watching.